the fundamental mechanics of what's going wrong.
That's absolutely the goal. We want to move past just the diagnosis and give you, the mental scaffolding to quickly categorize what's happening with cardiac dynamics.
Like learning the language.
Exactly. Learning the specific dialect of cardiology so you can differentiate the types of failure and really see the downstream effects on the body.
Right, and this is your shortcut to mastering those key differentiators. So our mission today is to decode the language of the failing heart. We're going to cover the two main ways it fails. Is it a problem with the squeeze or a problem with filling?
Then we'll follow the fluid. We'll track where that congestion ends up. Is it the lungs or is it, the rest of the body? And then we'll get into a really interesting paradox.
Oh, the one where the heart is working as hard as it can.
And it's still failing.
Yeah. And to wrap it all up, we are going to translate all of these complex mechanical failures into a single visual language, the pressure volume loop. It lets you see, get into the specific mechanical failures, the pump problems, and maybe more importantly, the body's own complex, almost self-sabotaging response that can make the problem so much worse.
That's the key. When you really synthesize the material, the core definition of heart failure always comes down to two issues. Either the primary pump, the myocardium, loses its ability to contract powerfully, or
it can't fill properly.
Or it can't fill properly because it's just too stiff.
Yeah.
Both of those paths, the weak squeeze and the weak fill, they ultimately lead to the same critical failures. Either cardiac output is too low to sustain the body, or the pressure inside the heart just gets so high it backs up into the lungs.
Okay, let's unpack that mechanical split right there, because this feels like the fundamental fork in the road for everything that follows. We're talking about HFrEF.
Heart failure with reduced ejection fraction.
Versus HFpEF, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction.
Right, and HFrEF is the classic failure mode that I think most people picture. It's systolic dysfunction. This is the floppy ventricle.
The floppy ventricle. And the mechanism there?
It's damage to the heart muscle cells, the myocytes, usually from something like a prior heart attack and MI. That injury just leads to a flat-out reduction in contractile force.
So when you have a floppy, weak pump, I imagine everything just sort of slows down. What does that actually do to the structure and to the symptoms?
Structurally, the ventricle dilates. It gets bigger, the wall thins out, which is all part of what we call ventricular remodeling. And hemodynamically, well, the ejection fraction and the stroke volume, they just plummet.
And for the patient?
Clinically, you're dealing with two huge issues at once. You've got symptoms of low cardiac output, fatigue, cold extremities, that kind of thing, because blood isn't getting out. And at the same time, you've got severe congestion symptoms like shortness of breath, orthopnea, because all that blood is backing up into the lungs.
Okay, so if we're listening to the exam story for HFrEF, what's the one absolute essential sign we need to flag?
The S3 gallop. That sound it's just so pathognomonic for systolic dysfunction. It's literally the sound of blood sloshing into a chamber that's already full and floppy.
Volume overload.
It screams volume overload and low EF. For anyone trying to keep these concepts separated, there's a good mnemonic, just think FLOP, failure, low EF, overloaded LV, and pulmonary congestion. And the biggest cause of this worldwide is ischemic heart disease.
Perfect. Okay, let's jump to the other side of the coin, HFpEF, the preserved EF failure. If the squeeze is still good, what is the mechanical flaw in this stiff ventricle?
The problem isn't the strength of the squeeze at all. It's the heart muscle's ability to relax. It's compliance. I mean, think of it like a brand new rubber glove that hasn't been broken in. It can squeeze powerfully, but it can't stretch or fill easily.
So it's stiff.
It's stiff. And this is usually due to chronic pressure stress, which leads to fibrosis or hypertrophy. The wall just gets thick and hard.
So the heart wall looks, I guess, structurally powerful, but that very strength is actually a liability when it comes to filling, right?
Precisely. Your end diastolic volume might be totally fine, but because the wall is so stiff, the left ventricular end diastolic pressure, that's the filling pressure, is massively elevated, even at rest.
Wow.
And that means the pressure in the left atrium and the pulmonary veins goes up instantly. That pressure spike is why the main symptom of HFpEF is almost always immediate exertional dyspnea.
And just like the S3 differentiated the floppy ventricle, the stiff one has its own signature sound.
The S4 gallop. S4 is the definitive physical finding for diastolic dysfunction. It's the sound of the atrium contracting forcefully, trying to shove that last bit of blood into a rigid, non-compliant ventricle.
So there's a mnemonic for this one, too.
Yep, think stiff. Stiff LV, tension increased, incomplete filling, filling pressure's up, and fatigue that hits the second you start moving.
Yeah.
And the single most common cause of this, hands down, is long-standing, uncontrolled hypertension.
That sets the mechanical stage beautifully, but here is where the story really pivots, right? Into the complexity that truly defines heart failure progression. The moment the heart struggles, the rest of the body tries to save it.
And that rescue attempt becomes the poison.
Exactly.
That is the entire plot twist of this disease.
Right.
It's called maladaptive neurohormonal activation. When cardiac output starts to drop, doesn't matter if it's a floppy or a stiff heart, the body interprets this as profound shock.
It panicked.
It panics.
Yep.
It triggers a massive systemic fire alarm to maintain blood pressure and keep blood flowing.
Okay, so what are the key systems involved in that fire alarm?
4 systems jump online almost instantly. You've got the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, RAAS. You get ADH or vasopressin. And then, as sort of a countermeasure, the natriuretic peptides like BMP.
And in the short term, this works.
In the short term, it's brilliant. The SNS increases heart rate. RAAS causes vasoconstriction. You maintain your blood pressure. You perfuse your brain. It's a lifesaver.
What happens if that alarm stays on 247? It must flip from being protective to being just fundamentally toxic. What is the worst consequence of that chronic overdrive?
The cascade of structural damage. I mean, just look at RAAS. Angiotensin II is a powerful vasoconstrictor. So with chronic activation, your arteries are perpetually squeezed down. That dramatically increases the afterload.
You're asking a weak heart to pump against a clamped hose.
A clamped hose, exactly. And then aldosterone comes in and causes sodium and water retention, which excessively increases preload and leads to edema and, critically, fibrosis in the heart muscle itself.
So wait. The body is constricting the exit pathway while simultaneously flooding the entrance pathway.
That's it.
That is the definition of self-sabotage.
It is. And the SNS is just as destructive over time. Chronic high levels of adrenaline, they cause a crucial biological change. The beta receptors on the heart muscle, they start to downregulate,
They just shut down?
effectively shut down. This makes the heart less responsive to everything, its own adrenaline, medications, and it critically increases the risk of deadly arrhythmias. This whole cycle of stress is what drives the disease forward.
And this destructive cycle is precisely why the cornerstone medications, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, why they work. They're not treating the muscle, they're turning off the toxic alarm system.
Exactly right. And we can even measure how loud that fire alarm is ringing. That's BNP, B-type natriuretic peptide. It's released from the ventricles when they're stretched and under high pressure. A high BNP is the key diagnostic marker that tells us, yes, this patient is congested. Their heart is under extreme stress.
Compensation, that accelerating vicious cycle where the body tries to save itself, but in doing so actually drives the heart toward collapse.
It's the ultimate biological trap. Decompensated heart failure is, the acute worsening of an existing problem. It happens when the body's own protective measures flip from being helpful to being destructive.
A self-perpetuating spiral.
Exactly. Low cardiac output triggers this neurohormonal chaos, and that chaos causes structural damage and congestion, which, well, it just leads to even lower cardiac output.
Okay, so we have to start with our analogy. I think it's the key to making sense of all this chaos.
Right.
Imagine the heart not just as a pump, but as a failing water pump system. So when the pump starts to sputter, when cardiac output or CO drops, the entire system just panics. It needs to maintain water pressure.
And its emergency response is, frankly, disastrous. It tightens all the pipes.
That's the vasoconstriction.
That's the vasoconstriction. And then, this is the critical part, it dumps massive amounts of extra water into the system to increase volume and maintain that pressure.
Which might work for a few minutes.
For a moment, yes. But what have you just done? You've just completely overloaded a pump that was already failing, and you're forcing it to work against incredibly high resistance.
You've just guaranteed its failure. Okay, so let's unpack this sequence, starting with the body's initial good intentions. When that CO drops, maybe from too much salt, a missed medication, a virus, whatever, the body senses a threat.
The first job is simple. Maintain perfusion, get blood to the brain, the kidneys, the vital organs. And to do that, it immediately calls in what I like to call the 3 armies of compensation.
Okay, army number 1, the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS. This is what most of us know as the fight or flight response, right?
Exactly. The goal of the SNS is all about speed and power. It releases catecholamines, that's just the medical term for stress hormones like adrenaline.
Right.
These flood the system to rapidly increase heart rate and contractility. It's forcing that weakened muscle to pump harder and faster. And for a moment, it's a fantastic rescue.
Army number 2, the RAAS. That's the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system.
Yes, so if the SNS is the speed booster, you can think of the RAAS as the volume regulator.
How does that work?
The RAAS gets activated when the kidneys sense low pressure. Its whole job is to restore that pressure by retaining salt and water. This is mainly done by aldosterone, which basically tells the kidneys, hey, hold on to sodium and water.
And all that increased volume means more blood is coming back to the heart. That's what we call preload.
That's the preload. So if the heart is weak, bringing more volume back helps stretch the muscle fibers, which, up to a certain point, makes for a stronger contraction.
That's the famous Frank Starling mechanism.
That's it. Initially, that increased preload really does help maximize the output.
And the third system, which I think is often the most misunderstood, is ADH, vasopressin.
ADH's role is simple but very powerful. It retains free water, just water, and that further boosts the circulating volume and helps crank up that preload.
So these 3 systems, they're essential for surviving something like an acute shock. They're adaptive, they're smart emergency maneuvers.
With the short term, yes. They're designed to hold pressure until the danger passes.
But this is the crux of it. This is the turning point where adaptive becomes, well, catastrophic. Maladaptive. What happens when those stress hormones stay elevated day in and day out?
That chronic SNS activation is just toxic to the heart. First, that widespread vasoconstriction, the tightening of all the pipes we talked about, it dramatically increases afterload.
Then afterload is the resistance the heart has to pump against.
Right. Imagine trying to squeeze toothpaste out of a tube when the cap is mostly closed.
It takes a huge amount of force.
Yeah.
And energy.
An immense amount. This drives up the heart's oxygen demand, risking ischemia and dangerous arrhythmias. But more than that, chronic catecholamine exposure physically damages the heart muscle cells. It causes myocyte apoptosis. It's literally poisoning the heart tissue.
And the RAAS, the system meant to save volume, it just ends up drowning the patient.
It becomes a massive liability. It leads to this unrelenting fluid overload, severe congestion. You see it as pulmonary edema fluid in the lungs and peripheral edema. But the damage is also structural.
How so?
Angiotensin II and aldosterone aren't just inert. They're highly inflammatory, and they directly cause fibrosis and hypertrophy. Scarring. This is the beginning of what we call remodeling.
So the body tries to strengthen the heart by adding muscle and holding water, but instead it just ends up with this scarred, stiff, hopelessly overloaded organ. And that third system, ADH.
That's what gives you dilutional hyponatremia. The sodium concentration in the blood drops simply because it's been diluted by all that retained free water.
And for a clinician, seeing that on a lab report,
it's a huge red flag. It's a marker of excessive ADH activation, and it points to really severe progression of the heart failure.
Okay, this brings us to the core of it all, the spiral itself. Let's walk through this catastrophic cause and effect sequence, not as a list, but as a continuous vicious cycle.
Right. We have to start somewhere, so let's call it step 1, a drop in cardiac output. And remember, this can be triggered by anything, a missed diuretic dose, or very commonly, a new arrhythmia like atrial fibrillation.
And that drop in output instantly triggers step 2, SNS activation overdrive. The body hits the panic button, catecholamines flood the system.
The immediate consequence is that massive peripheral vasoconstriction. This spikes the afterload, which immediately makes it harder for the heart to pump blood out. It worsens CO right away.
You can already see the loop forming.
It's immediate. Low output causes high resistance, which causes even lower output.
And while the SNS is busy tightening all the pipes, the low flow is hitting the kidneys, which kicks off step 3, RAS overdrive.
And this is a really critical junction because you get a dual hit, you get maximum vasoconstriction from angiotensin II, that's high afterload, and you get maximum fluid retention from aldosterone, that's high preload.
So the lungs just fill up, pulmonary congestion.
They do. And what's often overlooked here is the cardiorenal loop. When the heart fails, the kidney gets poor flow, and the kidney's response is to release all these RAAS components that then go on to further damage the heart.
So the two organs are feeding the failure of the other. The kidney thinks it's saving itself, but it's destroying the heart muscle.
Precisely. And step 4 follows right on the heels of that. ADH overactivation and that resulting hyponatremia.
Okay, so now we are dealing with a completely unmanageable volume of fluid.
An immense amount.
Yeah.
And this chronic, unrelenting pressure and volume overload now leads to step 5, ventricular remodeling, the actual structural damage.
This is where the heart muscle physically changes shape.
Yes. The toxic effects of angiotensin II and aldosterone, plus the mechanical stress, cause the muscle cells to become fibrotic and disorganized. For systolic failure, HFrEF, the ventricle dilates. It just stretches out like an old balloon.
And for diastolic failure.
For HFpEF, it becomes stiff. And a major consequence of that stretching can be severe mitral regurgitation because the valve no longer closes properly. The ring holding it in place is just too wide.
So the heart is now scarred, stretched, and overwhelmed, which naturally leads to step 6, dramatically increased filling pressures.
Absolutely. The end result of all that damage and all that volume is a massive increase in the pressure inside the left ventricle, the LVEDP, which then backs up straight into the lungs. This is the definition of backward failure.
Shortness of breath, peripheral edema.
All of it. And of course, because of the high afterload and all the structural damage, the CO drops even further.
And the cycle just restarts, accelerates, and spirals relentlessly toward total collapse. It's a truly self-amplifying system.
It is. And understanding that system is how you recognize the clinical signposts, which is what we need to get into now.
Right. Let's talk about what the listener really needs to know about the triggers that can push a stable patient right into that cycle. You call them the bad HF triggers?
Yes, the common precipitants are things like ischemia or a new heart attack, an arrhythmia like AFib, uncontrolled hypertension, any kind of infection, and the one I really want to focus on, NSAIDs.
NSAIDs. This is huge. So why is taking something like ibuprofen, an everyday pain reliever, potentially catastrophic for someone with heart failure?
NSAIDs block the production of something called prostaglandins. Now, in a healthy kidney, that's usually fine, but in a heart failure patient, their renal blood flow is often already pretty weak.
And prostaglandins are keeping those arteries open.
They're essential for maintaining some dilation in the renal arteries. So when you block them with an NSAA, you choke off blood flow to the kidney.
And the kidney immediately thinks the whole body's blood pressure is crashing.
Precisely. It triggers this aggressive, immediate RAAS surge, maximum salt and water retention.